Hello, Good Tree. This is Paul, and I have some answers for some of the questions you might have regarding the creation according to the Bible. So today we are going to cover chapter 7, and the question of the day is, doesn't carbon-14 dating disprove the Bible? So scientists use a technique called radiometric dating to estimate the age of rocks, fossils, and the earth in general. So many people, including the church, are convinced that this technique proved that the world is billions of years old. Therefore, they're attempting to re-evaluate and reinterpret the creation account in Genesis, especially the meaning of the word day. However, in this chapter, we are going to see how carbon dating, a particular radiometric dating, is actually proving that the world is not as old as many believe. So before we discuss the details of how carbon dating works, we first have to discuss some basic chemistry concepts. So we all know that atoms are made out of much smaller things called protons, neutrons, and electrons. So the number of protons determine the element. For example, all carbon atoms have 6 protons, and all oxygen atoms have 8 protons. Unlike the protons, the neutron can vary in any given type of atom. For example, a carbon atom has 6 protons for sure, but it can have 6 neutrons or 8 neutrons. In most cases, it also has 6 neutrons, like the number of protons, but it can sometimes have a different number of neutrons. We call this an isotope. Some isotopes are unstable, and they can change into another kind of atom, into another element, in a process called radioactive decay. Since this radioactive decay happens at a known measured rate, scientists believe that this is their key to tell how long ago a rock or a fossil was formed. So now that we understand what an isotope is and what radioactive decay is, let's find out how carbon-14 dating works. So carbon-14 is an isotope that decays slowly over time once a living being dies. Therefore, if we measure how much carbon-14 is remaining in a dead organism and how fast the decay was, and what was the starting amount of carbon-14 in the living being, then scientists are arguing that they could find out the age of the creature. So everything sounds fine until now, but there's an assumption made by the scientists that serves as a foundation to this entire process. This assumption is that the ratio of carbon-14 and carbon-12 has always been constant throughout history. The ratio is a set value that will never change and has never changed. This is their argument. The problem with this assumption is that if they are found to be wrong, then the whole theory collapses because this assumption serves as a foundation. The thing is, the ratio of carbon-14 and carbon-12 came out to not be constant. So scientists have also found out that the atmosphere has now reached a state of equilibrium. And this was not a pleasing discovery because it means that the world is not as long as we think it is. Because if the Earth was really billions of years old, then it should have reached a state of equilibrium already. Now, calculating for carbon-14 becomes more complicated because there are many factors that can affect carbon levels. So the amount of carbon that enters through the atmosphere is always different because the magnetic field surrounding the planet is growing weaker. This implies that there is a high possibility that there were less carbons in the atmosphere thousands of years ago compared to now. This makes calculating carbon-14 more complicated because there are now more variables to consider. According to the book, if we also take into account the Genesis flood, then it will be more complicated and more confusing to properly calculate for carbon-14. In 1997, there was a research project done by the Rate Group which tried to investigate the age of the Earth. So the team of scientists collected different rocks and fossils to check if there are still any traces of carbon-14 on them. If they are really millions and billions of years old according to some scientists, then it would make sense for there to be little to no carbon-14 remaining in them, because carbon-14 is an isotope that slowly decays. Unfortunately, the team found out that there is still a significant amount of carbon-14 left in these rocks and fossils. This is a huge discovery because it means that these rocks are not as old as some scientists claim them to be. So to summarize, what does all of this mean? Carbon-14 dating is a method that is based upon several assumptions, and those assumptions can result in a biased outcome. In fact, this chapter is arguing that carbon-14 dating is actually a method that will help prove that the Earth we live in is actually only a few thousand years old.